that I had nothing to worry about personally, at least. But I also knew that the law says a firm is responsible for the actions of its employees. What's more, I knew that if the case came to court, and it was aired in the newspapers, the bad publicity would ruin my business. And I was proud of my business. It had been founded by my father 24 years before. I was so worried I was sick. I didn't eat or sleep for 3 days and nights. I kept going around in crazy circles. Should I pay the money $5,000 or should I tell this man to go ahead and do his damnedest? Either way, I tried to make up my mind. It ended in nightmare.
Then, on Sunday night, I happened to pick up the booklet on how to stop worrying which I had been given in my Carnegie class in public speaking. I started to read it, and came across the story of Willis H. Carrier. Face the worst, it said. So I asked myself, what is the worst that can happen if I refuse to pay up, and these blackmailers turn their records over to the district attorney? The answer to that was, the ruin of my business. That's the worst that can happen. I can't go to jail. All that can happen is that I shall be ruined by the publicity. I then said to myself, all right, the business is ruined. I accept that mentally. What happens next? Well, with my business ruined, I would probably have to look for a job. That wasn't bad. I knew a lot about oil. There were several firms that might be glad to employ me.
I began to feel better. The blue funk I had been in for 3 days and nights began to lift a little. My emotions calmed down. And to my astonishment, I was able to think. I was clear-headed enough now to face step 3, improve on the worst. As I thought of solutions, an entirely new angle presented itself to me. If I told my attorney the whole situation, he might find a way out which I hadn't thought of. I know it sounds stupid to say that this hadn't even occurred to me before, but of course I hadn't been thinking, I had only been worrying. I immediately made up my mind that I would see my attorney first thing in the morning, and then I went to bed and slept like a log. How did it end? Well, the next morning my lawyer told me to go and see the district attorney and tell him the truth. I did precisely that. When I finished, I was astonished to hear the DA say that this blackmail racket had been going on for months and that the man who claimed to be a government agent was a crook wanted by the police. What a relief to hear all this after I had tormented myself for 3 days and nights wondering whether I should hand over $5,000 to this professional swindler.
This experience taught me a lasting lesson. Now, whenever I face a pressing problem that threatens to worry me, I give it what I call the old Willis H. Carrier formula. At just about the same time Willis H. Carrier was worrying over the gas cleaning equipment he was installing in a plant in Crystal City, Missouri, a chap from Broken Bow, Nebraska, was making out his will. His name was Earl P. Haney, and he had duodenal ulcers. 3 doctors, including a celebrated ulcer specialist, had pronounced Mr. Haney an incurable case. They had told him not to eat this or that, and not to worry or fret, to keep perfectly calm. They also told him to make out his will. These ulcers had already forced Earl P. Haney to give up a fine and highly paid position. So now he had nothing to do, nothing to look forward to except a lingering death.
Then he made a decision, a rare and superb decision. Since I have only a little while to live, he said, I may as well make the most of it. I have always wanted to travel around the world before I die. If I am ever going to do it, I'll have to do it now. So he bought his ticket. The doctors were appalled. We must warn you, they said to Mr. Haney, that if you do take this trip, you will be buried at sea. No, I won't, he replied. I have promised my relatives that I will be buried in the family plot at Broken Bow, Nebraska. So I am going to buy a casket and take it with me. He purchased a casket, put it aboard ship, and then made arrangements with the steamship company in the event of his death to put his corpse in a freezing compartment and keep it there till the liner returned home. He set out on his trip, imbued with the spirit of old Omar.
Make the most of what we yet may spend, before we too into the dust descend, dust into dust, and under dust, to lie, sans wine, sans song, sans singer, and sans end. However, he didn't make the trip sans wine. I drank highballs and smoked long cigars on that trip, Mr. Haney says in a letter that I have before me now. I ate all kinds of foods, even strange native foods which were guaranteed to kill me. I enjoyed myself more than I had in years. We ran into monsoons and typhoons which should have put me in my casket, if only from fright-but I got an enormous kick out of all this adventure. I played games aboard the ship, sang songs, made new friends, stayed up half the night. When we reached China and India, I realized that the business troubles and cares that I had faced back home were paradise compared to the poverty and hunger in the Orient. I stopped all my senseless worrying and felt fine. When I got back to America, I had gained 90 pounds. I had almost forgotten I had ever had a stomach ulcer. I had never felt better in my life. I promptly sold the casket back to the undertaker and went back to business. I haven't been ill a day since.
At the time this happened, Earl P. Haney had never even heard of Willis H. Carrier and his technique for handling worry. But I realize now, he told me quite recently, that I was unconsciously using the selfsame principle. I reconciled myself to the worst that could happen in my case, dying. And then I improved upon it by trying to get the utmost enjoyment out of life for the time I had left. If, he continued, if I had gone on worrying after boarding that ship, I have no doubt that I would have made the return voyage inside of that coffin. But I relaxed, I forgot it. And this calmness of mind gave me a new birth of energy which actually saved my life. Earl P. Haney is now living at 52 Wedgemere Avenue, Winchester, Massachusetts. Now, if Willis H. Carrier could save a $20,000 contract, if a New York businessman could save himself from blackmail, if Earl P. Haney could actually save his life by using this magic formula, then isn't it possible that it may be the answer to some of your troubles? Isn't it possible that it may even solve some problems you thought were unsolvable? So, Rule 2 is, if you have a worry problem, apply the magic formula of Willis H. Carrier by doing these 3 things. 1. Ask yourself, what is the worst that can possibly happen? 2. Prepare to accept it if you have to. 3. Then calmly proceed to improve on the worst.